Hi everyone, this is Mo Volans back for Tuts Plus, and in this video we're going to be covering sidechaining. Now this is something that I've already covered a fair amount in text-based tutorials, but I wanted to revisit some of the key techniques that I've used in the past in video format because I think it's always important to see these things being done firsthand rather than reading about them. So I'm not going to really be covering this standard kick drum ducking a bass line technique because I think that's been done and we know how to do that by now. If you're making electronic music, you've probably been doing that for a while. I will be looking at ducking things with a kick drum, but with a bit of a twist and with some extra technique that hopefully you'll find useful. We'll also take a look at using alternative processors, maybe not compressors, and I'll also show you something to do with dynamic returns that if you're a follower of Audiotuts, you might recall a tutorial of mine called creating dynamic returns. You can search for that, and it may be pretty useful to you to read the text as well as this. But it was pretty well read, and it should be nice to see it in video form. So let's get on with it, and I'll show you what I've got here. I've just got a beat, just a loop, and a bit of a sort of a groove loop. It's all pretty much loop based. We've got a synth loop, a shaker, and some percussion. Really, these are just to demonstrate the technique, so don't worry too much about the genre or what it sounds like. It's just to demonstrate the sidechaining technique. So first of all, I want to really duck this groove loop here with this drum loop. Let's have a listen to the two of them in their current state. That's pretty nice, but I want to clear the way for the kick drum in that loop. So let's get the mixer open. What happens if we apply a compressor just directly to this loop using the kick drum as a sidechain input? Now, because it's a drum loop, and let's have a listen to that drum loop by itself, there's not just a kick drum in there. We've got bongos, we've got shakers, we've got hi-hats, snare, stroke clap, and all of these things are acting as our key input, as our sidechain trigger. So you can see that the compressor is pretty much hanging on to every transient element in that loop. And that's when you've got just a kick drum, it's fine. You're going to create like a nice clean ducking effect, and you're going to let the kick drum cut its way through a bass line or a groove loop or a string or whatever you're using. But when you've got a loop like this, it's going to be difficult because you're going to have a bit of a mess. So the result is a bit strange and a bit garbled. In fact, we can hear it by itself. Not great. So what we do here is we use frequency dependent sidechaining. And if you think of a de-esser, this is a great example of frequency dependent sidechaining. It's essentially a vocal being fed back into a compressor and using itself as a key input, and then using a low pass filter to take out the very top end of the vocal. So the gain reduction occurs when a certain threshold or a certain amount of high end is coming through. Now, a de-esser does all that auto-magically inside the box, and you don't really have to worry about it anymore. But when compressors, sidechain compressors first were conceived, this is the sort of thing they were used for. We can do something similar. Let me just bring this right over here so you can see it all, in Logic's compressor. Now, don't worry that I'm using Logic's compressor because there are other compressors out there that do this sort of thing. Let me just give you a quick example. FabFilters Pro C in the expert section has a great filter. We can see here it's nice and visual. You can grab the whole thing and move it around. You can choose an external sidechain. And you can pretty much do exactly what I'm going to show you right now. And they've got a demo on their site if you want to try a different compressor. But really, this is a generic technique. So in the comments, don't get too hung up on, I haven't got that plugin. You know, it's always something people say. Just as long as you've got a compressor that will handle sidechaining and that has a built-in filter. And there are quite a few of them out there now. So we've got a sidechain filter just here. I'm going to go with listen. And this allows us to, well, you guessed it, listen to the frequency that we're manipulating. And then we've got this low pass filter here. So I'm going to take it down to around 100 Hertz. Now, this is with the whole drum loop coming in. And if I open it up, you can hear the whole thing, but we're just going to filter down until we can just hear the kick. And essentially, and you can see that sidechaining occurring there, essentially this gives us the same effect, or more or less the same at least, as just using a kick drum. So it means that you can use drum loops or entire groove loops or entire drum groups that you've mixed yourself and put a sidechain input from that group and filter out a specific part. If you wanted just the hi-hats, you would go high pass, and we could use that. And you can see that this is obviously a lot faster. We could open the release up. But you could start to create different sidechains for different parts of your drum. You could probably focus in on a snare drum with a bandpass or whatever you wanted to do. In this situation, we want that kick drum. So let's catch the top of it, try and get those bongos out. That sounds pretty good to me. And now if we go to on, got that classic pumping effect, and that's from a complex drum loop. Let's try it with the drum loop. Let's filter it around a little bit. Great. So we can home in on a specific part of a drum loop, in this case, the kick drum. And that is one use, at least, for frequency dependent sidechaining. Now, another thing I wanted to show you was using anything else apart from the kick to trigger a compressor. So realistically, we don't just have to use kick drums. We can use percussion parts. And I've got a percussion part here. So let's try using this, and we can take the sidechain filter off, and let's go with the percussion. Now it's okay, doesn't work quite as well as the kick, it's a little bit confused. We could use a high pass filter to focus in on the very top end of it, but what's the alternative here? Well, the alternative is not to use a compressor. Don't be fooled into thinking that sidechaining is compression. Sidechaining is adding a sidechain to any processors that will accept it. Ducking is definitely a compression technique. So if you hear people talking about sidechaining and ducking, they're really two different things. People use it as almost a slang term for the ducking effect that you hear in house tracks. But sidechaining is really a routing technique, and ducking is a compression technique that comes from sidechaining. So to say sidechaining is that ducking effect is probably incorrect. So we can apply ducking with other processes, in this case a gate. Let's try this. And this is an interesting effect. So what I've got is I've got the gate set up so it'll accept a percussion input. Try filtering that, and maybe we could add some delay. Delay tends to work very well in these situations. Let's go with a timeless. So there you go, that's the percussion sound triggering a sidechain on a gate on the groove, and obviously creating a completely different effect, but really a similar style of routing. So when you're thinking about sidechaining, maybe don't constrain yourself to compressors, because that's something that's going to limit your creativity in some ways, and maybe just you're going to end up with a very similar sound every time. Try other processors, anything that will accept a sidechain, start to mess around with it. Now, with the same sort of way of thinking, let's get away from compressing individual drum sounds or individual groove sounds or bass lines, and think about maybe compressing returns and groups and effects returns. This is something that I started doing quite a while ago, and I call it dynamic effects returns. And this is the one I was talking about earlier, the tutorial at least I was talking about earlier, that's in text form, that you can search for. And it seemed to go down pretty well. So let's have a listen to what we can do here. I'm going to turn off the groove. And I've got a synth here, just a very simple synth. Let's turn the... Right, there we go. I'm going to turn the percussion off as well. Now you can hear that that's a pretty big reverb. And it's really sort of drowning the synth sound to some extent. If we turn it off, you can hear the dry version. Let's turn this compressor off. Right. Now, how do we tame that reverb? Well, this is where the sidechaining comes in. And you can hear there that what I've done is I've applied the same low-pass filtered loop sidechain that we had on the original groove. Now, if we make it a bit more intense, and that's very different to ducking the part and the reverb. If we duck the part and the reverb, the part's going to duck as well. In this case, we're just ducking the effect, and it means you can turn the effect up quite high and still hear the dry part. And it works very well once the drums are in. You get this living link between the reverb return and a drum part. And you almost don't notice it once it's been running for a while. But if you take it off, you've got this huge ambience that sort of washes over everything. Click the compressor in. And without it, so that's definitely one thing that you can do there. But remember, you could duck anything with anything. So any instrument with another instrument, any instrument or reverb return or delay return with some percussion, or one piece of percussion with another piece of percussion. I mean, you could even duck a ride cymbal or a closed hat with an open hi-hat and create sort of a clutch group. There's loads of different things you can do with sidechaining and with ducking and gates as well. You can create those sort of trance type gates, you know, with specifically programmed percussion parts that you might not even want to put in the mix. I've definitely used what I call ghost parts just to trigger a gate that you don't even hear in the mix. And it's one way of creating a really tight, specifically personalized, custom gate part and gate pattern that you can't really create in any other way apart from using a step sequencer. But when you start to think about the routing in this way and routing things together, it's almost like your mix and your console and your entire mix becomes a synth. Especially with electronic music, you can link these things together and create these modulations between elements in your mix, and it becomes a lot more organic. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight into, you know, what you can use sidechaining for, and maybe start to get you thinking, push you at least in the right direction, so that you can start to get creative yourself and start to create your own custom sidechain routings. Let me know if this has been helpful in the comments. Give me ideas for future tutorials. I'm always happy to try and, you know, create something that you guys are going to enjoy and find useful. And let me know if you think any of this is incorrect or you've got a better idea, and I'll try to answer your comments as best I can. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Cheers.